Awesome. So we're going to go ahead and start presenting Sean Gillespie with human hunting. So a quick little intro on Sean. Sean is just this guy you know. Sean's career in InfoSec began as a network defender for the U.S. Air Force, where he later transitioned to an attacker role with an aggressor squadron. After leaving the Air Force, he has spent most of his career developing tools and techniques for intrusion detection for both the Department of Defense and private companies. He moved to the Bay Area as an early member of Mandiant's Redwood City SOC, focusing on advanced detection methods, and now works at Yahoo, working on projects such as GRR and for effective intrusion detection and response. Another well-known fact about Sean is that he has a cat that looks just like a killer whale.
Okay, clearly don't touch the cables. All right, my name's Sean Gillespie. Like I said, I work at Yahoo, primarily working on GRR. Go and get into what we're talking about. The first piece is a little bit on general automation and tools, a little bit about who the adversary is, then getting into preparations to go actually hunting for the adversary, and then some real examples with Q&A at the end if there's any time. So, automation is great. We've done a lot of cool things with automation, particularly in safety and security spaces. ID badges, where you scan the badge, it goes back to a back-end system, tells the guard this is what the badge is supposed to say, he validates the badge says that, lets the person in. Complex logistics and battlefield management was a big thing in the Air Force. We've got a lot of planes, a lot of logistics, a lot of people, a lot of fuel, a lot of weapons. All this stuff has to get moved around. And so putting all these into automation systems allow battlefield commanders to know what resources are available and where they need to go. Some of the stuff that I worked on previously, I actually worked at a hospital for a couple years. We did a lot of really interesting stuff with modernizing a lot of the technology, getting a lot of things online for them. One of the really interesting ones was wireless carts that have barcode scanners on them. So previously, it'd take 2 nurses to go into the room with the patient. They'd have to validate the correct blood or the correct medications, that is the patient, and that both nurses would have to agree that this is the correct thing to do, and they administer whatever blood or medications. So the system we built only required 1 nurse. So they were able to go in, do the first validation. The system would then, they would scan the patient, scan whatever meds or bloods. The system would actually validate this is the correct pairing, and then additionally would go further with medications and make sure that is this patient been given anything else that might interact with the drugs that you're about to give them. So we can do a lot of really good stuff with medication or with automation. Critical factors are really that there's skilled humans at the decision points in these chains. So that's great, except for when it isn't. Some examples recently with the Air France-Asiana Airlines. These were incidents where either the pilots didn't understand what the system was telling them, there was a system failure, something had happened that caused these planes to go down, and a lot of it was over reliance on automation. The 2003 Northeast blackout was another really good example. They actually had people in the field calling in saying, there's things going wrong, we have to go deal with this, but because the system wasn't actually raising the alerts that they were expecting, the operators didn't respond. They said, no, everything's fine, the system would tell us if there was a problem. Really, this is a critical one. There's F-22s that were flying from Hawaii to Japan, and everything was going great, clear skies, life is good. They crossed the international date line, and all the computers shut down in the air. They actually had to use visual on their tanker to turn around and fly back to Hickam. So this actually became a really critical piece in what I'm talking about here, in that the reason that that one didn't turn into a much worse disaster than what it was is that the people in charge of that were highly trained experts. They were able to actually recover and deal with the fact that their automation systems went away, and they're able to still control that plane and get back to safety. So with the airline stuff, Airbus has taken an approach to automate basically everything, and the goal is to increase automation to make flying more safe. And they've targeted more the pilot is going to be there to serve the machine, where Boeing has a slightly different history, but their engineering angle tends to be more the machines will be there to serve the pilot. And so their training is pretty different for these different types of systems, and it fundamentally alters how pilots and the planes interact. There's a lot of training about levels of automation where if the autopilot isn't doing what you want it to do, you need to lower the level of automation so that you're taking more control. And if the plane still isn't doing what you want it to do, you need to turn off your automation and fly the plane yourself. And that really relies on experts being at the helm of these things when the automation starts having problems. So there's a lot of talk about how automation is going to solve all our problems. We have all these pieces that we can automate, and we can make machines do all the work for us. And IBM had this big sales pitch for a long while where they're going to build these giant chess-playing machines at pretty ridiculous cost and go around the world saying, look, we can beat the best human chess players in the world, and they did really, really good with it. The problem is we still can't build machines that play Go very well. Go machines can build or beat human adversaries at moderate skill levels, but expert players thoroughly destroy these machines. Like, they just can't keep up. And what winds up happening is that the more complex the game is, the more variables there are, the more tactics there are, the less performant the machines are when trying to play against humans. So, moral is, automation is great for repetitive tasks. It's great for exact sorting and calculations. It's great for doing accurate calculations. And it handles large data sets very, very well. Humans, not so much at this. We get tired, we get fatigued, we make errors. Automation is bad at replacing highly skilled humans. Humans are very good at pattern recognition. We're very good at making sense of data. When data comes to us, we can actually build a story out of what happened and why it happened and how these data points relate to each other much better than machines usually can. We're also very good at changing how we're looking at how we're categorizing data on the fly. So if you're pulling marbles out of a bag and you start sorting them by color, and then you pull out a cube, you can decide, wait, I'm no longer sorting by color, I'm sorting by shape, and you start sorting by shape instead. And so it's very easy for humans to quickly shift how we're viewing data. The other big thing we're really good at is misdirection, particularly in the security world. We have a denial of service attack over here. All your engineers are responding to that. I'm going to go hit your sensitive data while your engineers are panicking about the denial of service attack. The machines are not going to be as aware of that kind of misdirection and bluffing that humans are capable of doing, and humans are going to be much more capable of detecting that sort of thing. So, where does that leave us now? We have cyber war now, where we have to defend our cyber bases against the cyber missiles of our cyber enemies. So we have to teach our cyber warriors how to use our cyber weapons. So, a little bit on the state of where these cyber weapons are. We have a heavy vendor focus on these magic black boxes. We want a vendor solution that replaces all the humans. We don't want to have to pay expensive analysts to do a difficult job. We want a solution that just takes care of it all for us, and this is what's getting sold. Very few of these systems that actually do some of the more advanced statistical analysis, machine learning, these types of things, very few of them are actually targeted at analysts. They're very much targeted at the checkbox and the compliance folks of, you built a system, it will magically detect everything, and it will just email you when there's a problem. And it's really trying to cut the humans out. So we wind up in the same problem with the airline issues, is we wind up with an over-reliance on automation. Just like you don't want your pilot to have his first experience flying a plane at 35,000 feet, you don't want your analyst to have a first experience of like what security looks like when the guys are running off with your data. We wind up chasing magic unicorns. So it's not all the vendors. The community has issues as well. We build a lot of really cool tools. A lot of incident response type stuff is built on open source tools, SleuthKit, Volatility, Recall. These are very, very useful tools, but they're often very complex, and they are very light on documentation. Or if the documentation is there, it's very spread out. And these tools rarely scale well. If you've got 5 machines that you're working with, that's great. If you've got 5,000 machines that you have to look at, you're going to be there a while trying to deal with this. So who is the adversary? It's really easy to lose track of who the adversary is when your day-to-day is dealing with computer systems. You're dealing with malware, you're dealing with PCAP, you're dealing with network traffic, NetFlow, all of these other things. And it's very easy to lose sight that behind all of that, there's a human attacker. Humans are very creative. We are very adaptive. The attackers tend to be very high skilled. There's script kiddies and there's different levels of attacker, but compared to the average computer user, all of them are pretty highly skilled attackers. And they have a reason for doing what they're doing. They're very focused on achieving whatever goals they have. It may be notoriety, it may be your banking credentials, it may be, whatever secret source code you have that's powering your organization. But they have goals and things that they are trying to achieve. So to hunt these guys, there's a number of systems that I categorize into a handful of different capabilities that you really need to be able to hunt these guys. Host interrogation is being able to interact with the host, pull files, pull data, that sort of thing. Host sensors are things that are more like event logging and pulling data back. Central logging is kind of the all-encompassing, like Splunk and things like that, where you're going to pull all this data. Network sensors, the standard fare, Bro, Suricata, Snort, like any type of network sensor stuff. And then alert management systems that are really tying this all together. So as these things feed and capture binaries, you can push them into malware analysis and actually have a number of places where you can actually interact with that data in a meaningful fashion. Not just, here's a bunch of line item log things that I'm going to alert on, but here's data that I actually have to manipulate. With the alert management systems, some of the key components that you need to have in that capability is severity classification, so you know what's important, what's not important, how to triage things. You'll have resolution status, so that you can say this is a false positive, this was handled, this was part of incident X, or whatever the case may be. And then you need to have notes, particularly for false positives, so when one analyst comes along, does all the work to say, this is a false positive, this is why we identified what's happening here, the next time that alert shows up, the next analyst doesn't have to redo all that work. They can actually see what happened last time and make the same determination and move on to bigger and better things. But in all of this, you also need the threat research of understanding what to go looking for and how to interpret that data. And you have books, sandbox analysis, threat intel, these types of things. Above all that, you need humans. This is a human adversary, and you need a human defender. You need humans for alert validation. When these automated systems generate alerts, they don't know what's going on. They don't have that picture of really what's happening. You need humans to look at the alert and go validate, this is what really happened. Was this a false positive? Is this something we care about? Is this something expected in our environment? Effective response. After they validate that alert, you need a human to go decide what to do about it. There's been no shortage of antivirus tools that decide some supercritical DLL is actually malicious and it shuts down the entire system. One of the examples I ran into was actually with McAfee EPO HIPS. It has this really great feature where if it detects a network attack, it'll block all communications to an IP for some configurable amount of time. What we'd ran into when I had arrived is they'd been having this problem with the SharePoint servers and the databases where the SharePoint servers would just go away and no one was really sure why. And so after I started getting into the host intrusion stuff, I built a bunch of dashboards. I actually got it set up so we could do real-time management of our alerts and see what was happening. And one day the call came in again, and the guys across the way from me said, we got the server, it's the SharePoint thing again. And I looked at my dashboard and it was the same host name. And I said, okay guys, what's the database server? And we matched it all up. I was like, well, what's happening is there's some 1998 PPTP alert that McAfee default deploys. And so every so often the SharePoint server would send a packet that triggers this. And for the next 10 minutes, the database server would quit talking to the SharePoint server. So the user would make the call, it would make it through the chain, it'd eventually get up to the guys that are actually going to have to deal with that server. They'd call the user and say, okay, what's the problem? The user would check and say, oh, well, nothing's the problem, everything's fine. And so when you have these automated systems trying to do all your containment, all your response, all of these things all by themselves, you wind up in a lot of situations like this where you can damage business critical systems without really understanding why any of that's happening. Another big piece of why you need a human is the emerging threats. As you cut off avenues of attack in your environment, it's going to take humans to really sit down and think, where's the next place that I'm going to get hit? The machines are not going to know, this is the next thing I need to go look for, this is the next thing I need to go protect. An example of this was about a year or two ago, I guess about a year ago now. I'd read a ton of our reports at Mandiant. I'd read a bunch of books looking for all these points where I could go looking for bad stuff in various environments. And I started noticing, well, none of the attackers are storing their executable code in the registry, and that seems like a really good place where they could move their code if they're trying to stay off the file system in some of the traditional places that we would look. And so I started writing indicators for, well, if the attackers go to store their executable code in the registry, what is that going to look like? And so some months later, after I left, I'd actually found out that these indicators had actually detected an attacker at one of the clients. And so the machines are not going to be able to do this sort of work. It's going to be humans that really have to sit down and think, what are the other ways that I can attack this system? How can I predict what another human is going to do next? So a little on the collection systems, the three categories. I basically break collection systems into two types. There's stream capture and state capture. Stream capture is the typical things where it's event logging. It's capturing state changes. So if something changes on a system, it's generating an event and sending that event somewhere. It provides you an excellent timeline of events, of process launches, file writes, these types of things. And it's great for investigations. If something happens, you really want that full timeline of everything that's happened. And it's really good for signatures and searches. When you know what you're looking for and you need to find it in real time, you can say, this is exactly what I'm looking for, and find it very quickly. The problem it comes with is it generates very large volumes of data. Especially in large environments, you have to be able to transfer that data, you have to be able to store that data, and you have to process that data. And particularly at very large environments, you're not usually going to be able to buy a vendor box that can do all the things that they promise with this type of data. You're going to have substantial investment to have the type of processing to get real-time information out of these sorts of data stores. State capture systems are more the forensic style. It's capturing a snapshot of what a system looks like at that point in time. It gives you a further historical reach into what's happened on that system. So unless everyone is reinstalling their entire environment every time they install Carbon Black or OS Query, you need a way to look further back into the past. If you were compromised 3 years ago and didn't know it, that could still be impacting your business today, and you just don't understand why. And so these types of state capture systems let you look further back in the past to try and understand what may have happened before. It's also really good for discovery of new threats. Some of the registry stuff I was talking about, being able to take the snapshot of the registry across fleets to see what is there, what isn't there, what the baseline looks like, and what deviations look like. It's excellent forensics. Forensics is typically, you want a snapshot of what the system looked like at the time that you found the intrusion. The big problem that you have with state capture is the gaps in timeline, is that if you have two capture points, you have to infer everything that happened in between. There's potentially a lot of events that were transient that you're not going to have that data for between those two captures. So for alert management, a little back to earlier, the events and alerts that you're getting are going to be unique for the types of systems that they're coming from. Network alert data, such as Suricata, Bro, those types of alerts, don't look like file systems and registries, and those don't look like log entries. So you need to be able to handle these types of data in different ways. You really want UIs that are tailored for the types of data that you're trying to interact with. They really should be relatively simple. The everything in the kitchen sink UIs really wind up back in the same problem of, do you have a flag? How many different ways do you click on this thing? And it eats up a lot of time in analysis, being able to get to the answers that you need very quickly. You need to be able to search and pivot very quickly. When I get response back from a persistence mechanism looking in the registry, and it lists a file, I don't want to have to go back through another system to go get that. I want to be able to immediately pivot off of that file name into the file system of that host and see that. And then say, okay, well, the file is still there. Now I need to pivot into the process list of that host and see, is that process still running? And then I want to be able to pivot over to the malware analysis platform and say, did we capture this? What are we doing about it? So being able to pivot through data really hinges on what kind of data that is, and it's very difficult to do when it's all just flat log line type stuff. For many of these things, particularly with state capture machines, if you're going to capture the state of the fleet, to compare it, you're going to need to do stacking, you're going to need to do filtering, and you're going to be able to tag the interesting items. So that as you are dealing with an incident, you can actually tag any light item evidence that a process was running, that this file was on the system, that this registry entry existed, that we see this network alert at the same time. You want to be able to tag all of that data so that you can hit the big report button and have all of those things actually tied together so all of you can work from the same sheet and see here's all the indicators of the attack, here's where other analysts can go take that information and go back into other systems and try and pivot. Some really good examples that I've worked with in the past or similar systems. Snorby is for dealing with network alerts. It's actually a really nice UI, and they even have iOS capabilities, so you can actually do incident response on the fly and at least get a good idea of what's happening. EPO is actually really good. It's kind of a configuration beast. They've got this entire dashboard monitoring system that is actually pretty decent. They just don't ship with all the queries and dashboards that you need to make it a really useful real-time event monitoring system. So if anyone's actually interested in that, I've got queries somewhere still that are really nice dashboards for that. Threat research. Again, this goes back to you need to know what kinds of things to look for. You are going to have to go to the books. You're going to have to go read sysinternals. You're going to have to go read, I believe, to the Apple Core. It's the Mac book that's kind of similar. You need to understand what the OS level and what these systems are doing. Read the forensics books, read the malware books, understand what types of things can happen, and that's also going to help you predict what the next move is going to be. You don't have to understand everything in every book, but as you read through, you'll get an idea of this is how the system operates, and here's potential weak points that other people may have or haven't identified yet. You need an analysis lab. You need to be able to do at least some level of malware analysis, static analysis, dynamic analysis. You want to be able to examine the protocols that the various tools and tactics generate, whether it's SMB stuff as they're doing lateral movement or if it's custom binary protocols that a malware sample does. And you want to be able to understand the techniques. You want to be able to spin up a domain controller and a bunch of systems with all of the software that you're running and run past the hash and see what your systems detect. Do lateral movement with the Macs and see what kinds of events that generates and validate that your systems are able to pick them up without trying to do all this in the production network. For threat intelligence, you need to read the reports. If you're skipping to the end for the MD5s, you're doing it wrong. We talk a lot about how advanced these attackers are and how threatening these attackers are and their techniques and the kinds of things that they're doing, and then we give out lists of MD5s and say, now go find them. These guys have recompiled their tools, they've changed the binaries. Trying to find them by MD5 is not going to help you. Which gets into malware databases. Take those MD5s and go back to VirusTotal and some of these other malware sample places and go get the samples yourself. When you read the report, look at the samples. Find the things that malware is doing. Learn about what the attackers were actually targeting. Learn about their behavior as attackers, where their favored working directories are, how they exfiltrate data, and understand what the attackers are actually doing. When you're looking at lists of IPs and domains from some of the threat intel feeds, a lot of that ages out really quick. There's a lot of overlap. There's very little context, but you can start to get a picture of how these attackers use domains. What kind of fake domains do they like to use? What kind of naming conventions do they stick with? And then a big one that I actually had a lot of problem with in the aggressor world is the red versus blue practice. There's a lot of exercises where we say, okay, we're going to go red team this network, and the red team comes in, kicks the door down, steals the crown jewels, goes home, writes a report, and says, this is how we kicked your ass. This doesn't really help anyone. What really should be happening for this to be an effective cycle is the red team needs to be going through step by step and ensuring, okay, we got a foothold. Did you see us? No. This is why you didn't see us. This is how you need to change your environment and change your tools to catch us. Now do you see us? Okay, great. Now we're moving on. And the blue team needs to understand that they can't just squash them and say, we won the game, because they need to know, well, okay, you made it past the first step. We're going to have to ignore that now and let you do the next step so that we can learn how to detect the next phase of the attack. And so red versus blue practice, the idea that we should hide what's happening from the blue team while we're doing it really doesn't make any sense because it doesn't actually make the defenders any better. They don't get to interact with the red team as the attacks are happening and get a solid understanding of how to detect those attacks. And in a lot of cases, the red team, if they haven't had a lot of defender side practice, they don't understand what footprint their tools are really generating. They don't understand some of the systems that might be in play and how they could be getting caught to improve their tactics as a real attacker would. So, the big project that I've been working on with Yahoo for almost the last year now is working on GER. It's an open source, rapid response tool for dealing with live response data. It's not meant to be the typical dead box forensics of there's been a compromise, I'm going to take a machine, and I'm going to go do analysis on it. Instead, it's meant to say, there's a compromise, that machine's online, I can go start interrogating it and start pivoting to other machines without tipping off the attacker that I'm onto them. And it lets me get much better intel on what the attacker is doing and actually respond and be able to remediate all at once to kick them all out of the network at the same time. It's all open source. It runs on a number of open source projects. It uses Recall for the memory forensics component. It uses SleuthKit for disk forensics. And there's actually a forensics artifacts component that's similar to various IOC stuff. It's a way to define things that you want GER to go check. So, a little more details on GER. It's, like I said, it's a state capture system. It's state machine based, so there's a component of flows, and we'll get into a little bit more in a little bit. The flows actually are the unit of work for GER in terms of like go capture a file, go list processes, but because it's state machine operated, it's not strictly go do this task and finish. It's go do this task, and based on the result, do this next task. And so you can actually chain together flows to get much more complex usage out of it. It's cross-platform. The agent runs on Mac, Linux, and Windows. It's very scriptable. It's all open source. It's Python. Most of the parsing of data happens on the server side. The downside is there's limited client-side filtering. Some of this is stuff I'm working on for a couple capabilities, but the idea is that you want a really lightweight agent, particularly in heavy developer environments. The Google folks started this project, and we're in a similar boat at Yahoo with developers everywhere. If you start taking over their machines and start doing too much work, they just start ripping things off. So you want a lightweight agent that doesn't disturb the user. So like I said, flows are the unit of work. There's a concept called hunts. So rather than interacting with just one host at a time, a hunt will let you run a flow against the entire fleet. You can give it different criteria, such as how fast do you want it to run across the fleet, how many clients total do you want to run. Looking for labels, you can label your clients to say only run against these clients. And then there's artifacts, which are used with a particular flow called the artifact collector. And they're a YAML-defined way to define points of interest on a host. Say, registry run keys, the location of cron tab files, the location of etc password. And you can start building out all of these artifacts. So instead of an incident responder needing to remember every possible thing that they need to go check, you can actually have them predefined in the system so you can run the flow that says, I need to go collect all of these artifacts and then pivot and do more artifact collection on different systems. So the common flows, more interesting ones, there's an interrogate flow that's gathering system information, hardware, MAC address, IP, users. There's an artifact collector flow, which I talked about. File finder is just searching. It's searching the fleet or searching a host for a file, which you can then run in a hunt to search the fleet. Registry finder, same kind of thing. Analyze client memory is for running recall plugins on hosts. Memory collector will actually let you capture full memory captures over the network. Netstat, list processes, launch binary is pretty self-explanatory. So to actually go hunting, some of the things that I like to do with this is create an artifact that's going to collect all your live response data. So you can chain artifacts together. So one artifact can define that it actually needs to go collect these other 5 artifacts to be complete itself. So you can define an artifact that says these 5 things for Windows, these 10 things for Mac, these 7 things for Linux, and then use that one artifact to run a hunt against an LR label. So you have this hunt with a flow running artifact collector for your live response that's only going to run on clients that you've labeled LR. So then create hunts for actually hunting what you're looking for, persistence mechanisms, strange-looking processes, things like that. And then when you find a host that looks like it might be compromised or you want to do further validation on, all you have to do is apply the LR label. The next time the host checks in, the hunt will see that it has that label, and it will go do all of its live response collection for you. When it actually completes that, it can actually email you and tell you, I have all the data that you need, and an analyst can then come back and start doing analysis after the system has collected everything. So the types of things that you want to hunt. Processes, there's a lot of interesting things here. There's bad parent processes. If service host is running under Explorer, or IE, like these are not where this normally belongs. SMSS always has a PID of 4 or 8, so if you see that process without the correct PID, that's an interesting thing that you need to go check out. Unique processes. If the process only exists on a few hosts in the entire fleet, it's worth checking out. It might be an edge case, or it might be something malicious. Open connections is another really good one. If you see LSAS connecting to the internet, you probably have a problem. So these are things that you can do with GUR, is tell it, I'm going to go search the fleet looking for any LSAS process that has a connection to the internet. Registry is full of persistence mechanisms. There's too many to list. Authentication manipulation. There's a lot of different things you can do. You can do authentication bypass with debugger keys. You can do hooking with some of the LSAS key, or LSA keys. So anytime you change your password, a DLL gets loaded that records your password and sends that to the attacker. Services and daemons. Look for wrong configuration. It's pointing at the wrong binary, pointing at the wrong service DLL. It's got strange options that aren't normally configured. Look for unique services, services that only show up on a few hosts. Obfuscated files. If you see sys.dll in system32, but FileMagick reports that as a RAR file, there's probably something going on there you need to go check out. Suspicious file placement. cprogram.exe. Windows helpfully takes away the need for escaping spaces, but that also means that cprogram.exe will get executed on boot. Scheduled tasks and cron jobs. Especially in Windows, scheduled tasks are a really good lateral movement trick. Cron jobs, really good persistence. These are all areas that you can go looking, especially with a state collection system. Go capture the state of your fleet, and then go do stacking. So think about your threat research. Think about what you see. Think about what the attackers are doing. Think about what the attackers are doing to try and evade your systems. And think about what evidence they're going to be leaving behind when they do that, where they're going to put files. If they're doing time stomping, you might have PE files that have a compile time that are later than their written to disk time. So these types of things will let you go find where attackers might be that other systems maybe didn't pick up. And then try and generalize when you see the specific attacks in these reports. Don't just search for the file name. Don't just search for the MD5. You need to think about how they're actually doing it. If you see multiple reports where the attackers use WinSSH or WinSSL, and you can infer their naming convention, you can start looking for their naming conventions instead of just, I'm going to blindly search for a bunch of file names. So use bulk collection where possible. If you're doing launch agents or launch daemons, you can pull everything back pretty easily. plist files aren't that big. GUR actually understands how to dedupe that, so it'll only download a file from the first host it sees it on. For every other host that it needs to download that file, it will check to see if it already has it. If it already has that file, it won't go download it again. It'll just set the pointer in the database to say, here's another system that has a copy of this file. Filtered collection where impractical. If you're trying to do looking for time stomping, like on PE headers, it's probably not going to make sense in most environments to download every PE file across the entire environment to go analyze that. So getting some filtering in place on the GUR client will be a good thing to expand the types of things you can search for reliably. Use artifacts with parsers where possible. I actually wrote parsers for the launch daemons and launch agents. So instead of just collecting the plist files and putting them in the GUR database for you to go look at, it actually collects all the files, puts them in the database, but then parses out the interesting bits, like what program is it actually running. So when you're looking at your results from GUR, you're not just getting a list of these are all the files I collected, you're actually getting a list of these are all the programs that are being executed by these files. The API, there's a HTTP API for pulling out data in JSON format. And then there's a GR console that's basically an interactive Python that loads all the GR libraries so you can actually interact with the internals of GR and the actual objects as they are in the database. This goes back to you want to use systems that understand the data that you're working with so that you can easily pivot. You don't want to just flatten it all the time, because if you're dealing with a directory structure, you can actually walk that directory structure rather than just having a list of files. And then when you bring this data back, stacking and filtering comes into play. If you are dealing with the more flattened structure, you can start to stack components of that. How many of these registry keys are referencing the same binary? How many of these launchd are referencing the same binary? And then if it doesn't stack well, you can start doing filtering to quickly filter out, these are known false positives, these are known things that we use in our environment, where's the interesting stuff? So we're going to go through a couple quick examples. These are things that I did while doing a lot of development and testing with GR, rolling it out. These were not strictly dedicated hunting efforts. A lot of the example data I'm going to show is kind of cut and pasted because the tools that I was using to do this were very raw, command line, messy stuff. And it was mostly just to verify that the system was actually up and running and working. So we're going to go through some common file placement attacks. We're going to go through some run key stuff, and we're going to go through OS X launch daemons. So this is actually what an artifact looks like. It has a name, a document string. It defines a collector type, so it can be file, registry, command, and it can have arguments. In this case, a file collector type has a path list. So you can actually go through and define all the paths that you want to collect. You can see you can define environment system root, so you don't have to know, it doesn't have to be absolute paths. And it also has the ability to do users, home directory, user SID, things like that. So here's some example results. Pulled this back, did quick stacking. If you haven't seen the sethc util man, those are easy authentication bypass tricks for file placement. You can see there's a whole bunch that are exactly the same size. So those are probably fine. That makes sense for a fleet of Windows hosts. As you get into the lower numbers, it gets interesting. You need to go validate, why do I only have 2 of this particular version? Chased all those down. It was just odds and ends servers, patch levels, things like that. Nothing particularly interesting. OCI DLL is actually pretty interesting. There's a well-known persistence mechanism. If you drop OCI DLL in System32, when the MSDTC service starts, Microsoft has helpfully put the registry keys in saying, oh, you're probably an Oracle customer, so we're going to go ahead and load this DLL when we start. If it's not there, the DLL fails to load, no big deal. If the DLL is there, it loads it up as system-level privileges. And so I actually tracked this one down, and it was the first time I actually saw the Oracle DLL installed in System32. This was the legitimate, real deal. And it kind of comes back to developers. Developers do weird stuff. The crypt-based one, however, is a privilege escalation trick, and what I found, or a search order hijacking trick, what the file actually was a UAC bypass. It was a well-known code. I ran strings on it, found some obvious strings, and found the actual code for the UAC bypass in GitHub. Not a whole lot came out of that. Again, developer tricks, getting irritated with systems. They go download GitHub, they compile things, and they do stuff on their hosts. So for the run key example, some of the format has actually changed. The GR artifacts repository just changed some of the formatting for how you define these, but it's basically the same. You're still defining a path to a run key. So we get results like this. Every user has the same thing in their local directory. This is not super useful. Stacking is not going to work well on a key like this. Now you can do some data manipulation. You can carve off the user directory and that sort of stuff. But again, just quick looking at the results, this doesn't help much. So instead I decided to get some regexes out that I've dealt with in the past. This is a regex looking for registry keys that are referencing ADS strings. So if you see a run key or something like that, referencing an ADS string, there's probably something not right. Poison Ivy did this a lot when it was still easy to execute out of ADS. So in this case, because some of the execute out of ADS stuff has been disabled in later versions of Windows, there's still ways around it. In this case, they're using regserver32 to load this DLL. And so I went to go validate these 2 hosts. Obviously, run SVC host is a pretty sketchy run key. And it turns out AV had already gotten these things, but they were 2 Bitcoin miners. Similar trick here. I'm just going to grep the results. Came back with NJRat, Houdini, Ninja Worm, whatever you want to call it. Variations of that. Again, it's pretty obviously not okay stuff, but all you have to do is really simple grep search through your results, and it all falls out. And so for the Mac, this is one of the examples I had with a parser, where instead of just grabbing the files, I was actually pulling the files back and parsing the content of those files. And came back with a similar problem, where if I stacked it, I had a bunch of one-off systems. But I noticed in the one-off systems that there was a com.apple. And in a fleet of Macs, there shouldn't be one Mac that has a com.apple plist. There's something wrong with this picture. And pointing at user bin global update does not seem like a thing that Apple is going to be doing. So I pulled all these files back, and the global update file was missing. The watch.sh file was actually there, and it tied those 2 files together. So those 2 plists were obviously related. And then I pulled the MacHook file back, threw it in VT, or through the MD5 in VT, and it was WireLurker. So I was actually able to pick this up before any of the other systems were able to, using GR to actually go actively hunting for the attackers. So coming soon, I'm working on a lot more parsers for things like app jobs, cron jobs, stuff like that, to make it easier to get data out quicker. Better searching for file type, doing file magic and things like that, so I can say, show me all the zip files and show me all the RAR files in System32. Better filtering for artifacts from flows. The idea is to have at least some level of client-level filtering, so that in searches that we're going to be bringing too much data back, we can filter it down a little bit on the client side before we bring it back for processing. And then the big one is the better tools for working with GR data. Outside of Google, there's not a lot of tools for effectively dealing with a lot of the data that comes out of GR, particularly with some of the past experience of dealing with similar systems. I want to build a lot of the similar UI to actually be able to quickly analyze the type of data that's coming out of GR, to be able to tag it, to be able to move around in it, to be able to stack it, provide comments, provide history. When you see the same thing in the next month, when you run your hunting scripts, you already know that you've already evaluated what that was. If you already have some of this set up, you've already got a platform to do these things, to get a little bit further with GR, you can actually start reading your process execution logs, your AV logs, because it is so scriptable. When you see these events happen, you can actually pass these events on back to GR to go schedule LR capture, to go capture that binary and feed it to your malware analysis platform, and to do all these other automation bits. Another possibility is taking your network alerts. As you get network alerts or interesting network flows, you can actually have it go back to GR and say, well, I need to go find the host that I think is associated with this, and then pass that into a flow and say, this is the IP that it was connecting to. Do the process list. When it finds a process that was connected to that IP, you can have the flow take the next step of go capture that process. Take that process, put it into our malware analysis platform. Then schedule like live response collection for full investigative data. And then go capture that. By the time all this is said and done, when a network alert has happened, emails start flying, by the time the analyst gets to the system to deal with it, all the data they need should already be there. It should have been able to capture the binary, capture live response data, and give them a really good starting point so they're not wasting time getting further into the investigation. So, here at the end, what we need is we need more automation that enhances human capabilities rather than trying to replace them. We need more focus on hunting and alert validation skills, actually being able to respond to this stuff in a timely fashion. We need higher quality threat data and sharing. Giant lists of IPs and hashes and domains are not super useful. We need more information about what the attackers are doing, how they're doing it, what their preferred methods are, and things that we can actually turn into actionable intelligence. And we need to stop looking for magic unicorns. Another big one, again with GR for me, is that we have an industry that's built a huge business process on things like Apache, on Linux, all of these open source tools. And I think it's time that as an industry, we really need to start building high quality professional open source tools that are at the level of Apache, that are the go-to answer for the industry, because we have the capability to build these tools and make this better without having to pay protection money. So, any questions?
How do you tell what's the authentic binary on some high machine? Do you calculate the hashes when you flag the thing that there are database hashes to and minus total? What's the integration with GUR for hash bases?
So for dealing with hashes, the hashing piece with GUR happens on file acquisition. When you actually tell it to acquire a file, it'll do the hash and send the hash back to determine if it already has a copy of it. At that stage, it's up to really the analyst to figure out how do you want to build your process. Do you want to check all those against VirusTotal? Do you want to check them against NSRL? Do you automatically feed them into your malware analysis platform and see what comes out? So it's more based on that. It's not based on searching for hashes.
Find all the Trojan SSHs across your Linux install base.
Mm.
They can use GUR to do that kind of a high.
So the way I would do that, just like, yeah, sorry, to find the Trojan SSHDs across your fleet. Just the quick thinking on stage, the way I would probably handle that is I would just tell it, go collect SSHD from every system. So it's only going to collect the file from the first one it finds. So it's only going to have one copy. So if you have a large fleet, you're not going to be doing a lot of file transfer because it's only going to have to do it the first time. When you get the results back, you can stack it and quickly say, you know, X thousand of my fleet have this hash, this percentage only has this hash, and then you can start doing analysis on the few and far between numbers. So we, to get in a little bit how Yahoo used it, I started spinning it up and we got, I'm sorry, the question was how we do the analysis once data's back. The short version is no, we use the actual GUR, either the HTTP API or the GUR console. In our case, it's mostly the HTTP API because the HTTP part flows through the access control mechanisms that the admin UI uses, whereas the GUR console piece is using just the authentication. Like if I'm on a server that has GUR console, all I have to do is read the config file to get the passwords to the database. And so because we're doing a lot of auditing, we have that flow through the HTTP piece so that we can actually do the user level auditing of who's pulling what data. With GUR console, right now it's mostly for us, like as the admins of the system, to go in for maintenance or dealing with problems because it bypasses that user level authentication, and we're just authenticating directly to the database. Hopefully that answers what you're after. Okay. We actually, in the latest release of GUR, there's a MySQL advanced data store. The previous MySQL data store did not scale very well, and so, I see some nods. We got to a couple thousand clients and the thing caught on fire, and then it was much scrambling to start restructuring the database, redoing some of the tables, and we currently have it running on stable at around 15,000 hosts, and there's no signs that we can't go further than that, so we're probably going to start testing further than that soon to see how far we can push it before we hit another roadblock with our data store. Any other questions? All right, thank you.